If you're prepping for a high-stakes meeting, or maybe you're just curious about why, after 4 decades of nonstop promises, our national education system often feels like it's being held together with sheer willpower and a lot of duct tape, you've come to the right place. Our sources today acknowledge a premise that is, frankly, staggering. We've lived through 40 years of relentless, systematic education
For
reform,
40 years.
and each one was marketed as a revolution, a new dawn that would fix everything. Yet, the reality we face today seems to be defined not by excellence, but by crisis. So our mission for this deep dive is crucial. We're going to conduct a kind of forensic accounting of those last 4 decades. What policies were actually implemented, what was neglected, and who, maybe surprisingly, truly benefited.
And we have to do that because before we even think about future high-class reforms, we absolutely need to understand the mess that's been made. It's the core paradox that just leaps out from the source material. I mean, we've had nearly half a century of transformation, of restructuring, and yet the result is a system that looks, well, suspiciously like the old one.
But with some major new problems attached.
Major new problems, critical deficiencies. We have a workforce crisis where teachers are just leaving in droves, a staggering 13.8 billion pound repair backlog for basic buildings, and this is the really provocative part.
Come on.
A new class of executives running multi-academy trusts, or METs, who are earning pay packages that, they belong in a corporate boardroom, not the state education sector.
That is a difficult picture to square. So let's trace this back. Let's go to the starting point, the 1980s and 90s. The sources call this the Great Marketization era. What was the thinking behind that first huge wave of change?
The driving force was competition. Competition and consumer choice, but applied directly to public education. The government wanted to create a market of schools.
A market. So what did that actually look like in practice?
It meant introducing the pillars of what we still know today. So you have league tables.
To measure performance.
Exactly. Then formula funding, which tied money directly to student numbers. And critically, parental choice. So schools had to compete for those students and, of course, the funds that came with them.
And there were also big changes to how schools were actually managed on the ground, right?
Absolutely. We saw the introduction of local management of schools, or LMS, which pushed financial control down from local authorities to the individual head teachers. And at the same time, you get the first grant-maintained schools, which were sort of the first to get real independence.
So the theory was give schools freedom and financial control, and that will drive up standards.
That was the theory. Spur innovation, efficiency, all of that.
But the sources note that all this freedom, all this competition, it needed a counterpoint to stop it from becoming total chaos.
It did. And that counterpoint was the national curriculum. The source notes this was meant to keep all that freedom suitably tidy, making sure that while schools could compete, they were all still teaching broadly the same stuff.
Okay, so the theory competition equals excellence. Sounds pretty logical on paper. But what was the reality in the 90s?
The reality was, well, the exact opposite of streamlined efficiency. It was a massive increase in bureaucracy, in paperwork, all tied to managing the funding, proving you were doing well in the league tables.
So instead of innovation, you got management overload.
Management overload. And
Yeah.
the capacity was so uneven. Some schools, especially in more affluent areas, they thrived. But struggling schools, they just sank faster. The focus was all on structure and management, not really on teaching.
And that really sets the stage for the next decade. We get into the 2000s, and we start layering new things on top of this system. This is when specialist colleges appear, sports, language, tech.
That's right. And importantly, this is when the very first wave of sponsored academies began to appear.
Okay, so these were the predecessors to the huge system we have now.
They were. Generally, they were failing schools taken over by a sponsor, maybe a charity, a university, or a business, and given a fresh start, often with a lot of new money.
And did it work? Was that early model effective at turning those schools around?
The evidence is mixed, but it gives us a really crucial insight. The sources confirm that some of those early academies did successfully turn around,
Oh.
but, and this is the key distinction, that success was often down to two very tangible things: new buildings and equipment from new capital investment, and crucially, strong new leadership. The governance label, the academy status itself, was often confused with the actual benefit of new resources.
So it wasn't the logo that fixed it. It was the new investment and the new head teacher.
In essence, yes. The new resources were the key ingredient, not the new name on the door.
That distinction is so important because it brings us right to the physical state of the schools themselves. We've established that the reforms were focused on the organizational charts, the logos. But while all that was happening, the physical foundations were starting to buckle.
This is where the story gets genuinely alarming. This is where the failure to prioritize substance over structure becomes undeniable. We're talking about a physical infrastructure crisis. The overall repair backlog, just to bring our schools up to a safe, functional standard, is a staggering $13.8 billion.
Wait, 13.8 billion. We have to pause on that. That's not for, fancy new facilities or luxuries. This is for basic safety.
Basic safety and functionality. We're talking about schools where the heating fails, roofs leak, electrics are outdated. The source highlights that over 700,000 pupils are right now in schools that need major repairs.
And this includes those high-profile issues, like the failing RAAC concrete beams.
Yeah. Exactly. The RAAC beams, which are past their lifespan, but also thousands of building blocks from the 60s and 70s that are simply crumbling. While the debate was all about achieving excellence through market forces, the actual environment for learning was allowed to decay.
Sounds like a slow-moving train wreck. But you said this crisis was the direct result of a policy decision.
It was. And to understand it, we have to talk about a program called Building Schools for the Future, or BSF.
BSF.
BSF was launched in 2004. Crucially, it was the largest school capital program in British history. Its aim was incredibly ambitious to rebuild or refurbish every single secondary school in England over 15 to 20 years.
Every single one. That's a huge coordinated national plan. What did that actually involve beyond just a coat of paint?
Oh, it was holistic. It was about full rebuilds, major refurbishments, state-of-the-art labs and libraries, ICT upgrades, energy efficiency. The projected cost was big, around 52 to 55 billion pounds over 2 decades, but the source says that was simply the price of doing the job properly.
For a moment, it sounds like we actually had a coherent long-term strategy for the school estate.
We did.
And then what happened?
In 2010, the new coalition government under the Education Secretary Michael Gove canceled it, just canceled it outright. It was dismissed as bureaucratic and wasteful. The long-term strategic investment was just scrapped.
Yeah. And what did they replace that 50 billion pound national strategy with?
Dramatically scaled down initiatives, a smaller priority schools building program, and a series of short-term competitive capital pots.
So money dried up.
Immediately. The sources show capital budgets were slashed by 25 to 50% below the mid-2000s levels. It completely validated the warnings people gave at the time that if you cut capital spending now, you just end up paying double later.
And we are now paying that double. That 13.8 billion backlog is the bill coming due.
It's the bill coming due.
So we have this collapse in infrastructure spending at the exact moment the reform engine is revving up to maximum speed. This takes us to the post-2010 era, the age of mass academization.
Yes. The 2010s saw every trend go into overdrive. Mass academization truly took hold, defined by converter academies, the explosion of multi-academy trusts, free schools, a whole new layer of oversight with regional schools commissioners.
The entire system was being rebuilt.
Dismantled and rebuilt, really, as a collection of autonomous trusts.
Can you just quickly clarify for us the difference between a converter and a sponsored academy?
It's an important point. A sponsored academy, like the early ones, is usually a struggling school that is forced to join a MAT, but a converter academy is usually a successful school that chooses to convert to get independence from the local authority.
Okay, so two different routes into the same system.
Exactly. And this rapid, deep structural rewiring of the map came with a massive, quantifiable price tag.
And we should be clear, these are just the tracked costs. This doesn't even include all the uncounted legal and consultancy fees.
Right. So let's look at the numbers we do have. The early sponsored academies alone cost the public about $3.2 billion. The direct conversion costs just the fees for the paperwork to convert schools between 2010 and 2017. That was another $745 million.
Wow.
And when you start factoring in things like free school capital spending, the conservative estimate for the overall structural program hits somewhere between 4 and 6 billion pounds.
4 to 6 billion pounds spent just on the mechanics of changing who owns a school. So what's the realistic total when you factor in all those unaccounted for expenses?
Realistically, the sources suggest it's closer to 8 to 10 billion pounds, maybe even more. This is a staggering amount of money spent on lawyers, reorganization, rebranding.
On architecture, Not in bricks and mortar.
Precisely.
I just have to stop you there. We have a £13.8 billion repair backlog for basic safety, which we decided not to fund, and yet we then spent almost that entire sum, £8 to £10 billion, on a structural reorganization. That just seems like a monumental misallocation of resources.
That is the crucial observation. That frames the entire failure of this era. The money that could have rebuilt every crumbling school or seriously boosted teacher pay was instead channeled into changing the system's legal status.
And for that £8 to £10 billion, what did we actually get?
Well, this is where the evidence from groups like the Education Policy Institute, the Sutton Trust, and even the House of Lords Library is just remarkably consistent and, frankly, pretty sobering.
What's the conclusion?
The conclusion is there is no structural magic. The act of conversion itself doesn't make a school better. What really matters, what drives performance, is effective leadership, enough good staff, and adequate resources. The type of governance, the logo on the sign, it just doesn't deliver consistent gains on its own.
So if the teachers and the students weren't the main beneficiaries of this massive spending, that money had to go somewhere else. And this is probably the most controversial part of this deep dive. Who are the financial winners?
Well, you have to follow the money. And when you do, you shift your focus from educational goals to the financial patterns these reforms created. The source notes that a completely new consultancy ecosystem just flourished.
What does that mean?
Firms specializing in every part of the transition: conversion services, financial management, procurement, branding, governance training. A whole industry was built just to service the perpetual churn of structural change.
And the analysis also points to some concerning links in the public record.
It does. It notes that some major political donors were linked to academy trusts or to firms that directly benefited from academization. It created a huge financial mechanism that rewarded people for facilitating the change, regardless of the educational result.
And that architecture also created a new class of executives within the system itself.
Yes, a new parallel executive class. This is where you see the salaries of multi-academy trust CEOs just surge to corporate levels. We're talking about pay packages reaching anywhere from $200,000 up to £450,000 plus per year.
So the money flowed upward and outward, away from the classroom. The reform created a very clear set of financial winners, consultants, trust executives, but the sources repeatedly show these were not the people actually working with students.
That is the unmistakable pattern of the last 40 years, a massive injection of public money into the structure and the ecosystem around it, while the core infrastructure and the frontline workforce were systematically starved.
And we have to stress, this wasn't happening in a vacuum. People were sounding the alarm the whole time. The sources point to some incredibly sharp critiques from experts and unions.
They were unified in their concern, and they were consistent. You have the National Education Union, the NEU, warning very clearly, you can't improve schools by redrawing the wiring diagram. The NASHA, focused on the workforce, said pay erosion means losing good teachers, which basically predicted the crisis we have now.
Even head teachers were saying it.
Pointedly. No serious country allows its state to crumble. But the warnings were ignored.
So, despite all that, the structural focus continued, eating up billions. Let's bring it all home. What is the net result of 40 years of this? Spending billions on the architecture while ignoring the foundation and the people inside.
We are left, according to the sources framework, with three massive compounding deficits. This is the enduring legacy.
What are they?
First, a severe capital deficit, that $13.8 billion repair bill we created. Second, a profound workforce deficit, a structural teacher supply crisis caused by years of pay cuts and crushing workloads.
And the third?
And finally, a governance deficit, a system of increased complexity and cost that has demonstrably failed to deliver the added value it promised for students.
That brings it into such sharp focus. The distillation is this. After 40 years, we ended up with bigger math CEO salaries, smaller teacher pay packets, bigger consultancy invoices, and smaller capital budgets. We reformed the system's structure, but failed to improve its core function.
The conclusion is really sobering. The goal of achieving a universal, private-level state education system, while it can't realistically be pursued until the damage of the last 4 decades is undone, we have to fix these deficits first.
This analysis gives you such a crucial framework for evaluating any future reform you hear about. Given the detailed evidence that structural changes alone failed, and often just increased cost and complexity, you have to ask a foundational question. How should the focus shift away from debates about governance, from the logo on the school sign, and decisively toward directly addressing those specific, quantifiable deficits of capital and workforce? because all the evidence shows that it's leadership and staff, not the organizational chart, that truly drives success. Something critical for you to mull over until our next deep dive.